Right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to this live AMA, Ask Me Anything, Ask the iGaming Coach with Next.io, where we're going to talk about imposter syndrome, something that I believe like many of us struggle with in gaming. It's, as we all know, it's an industry where we get promoted really quickly if we do our best. And often that goes with this feeling of being behind and perhaps feeling like an imposter. I run a podcast as well, which is called the iGaming Leader Podcast. And I've brought with me 4 guests that have all appeared on our podcast and have all spoken about imposter syndrome and how that's affected them. So today I want to talk about how that's actually showed up in their life, what you can learn from it, and also give you the opportunity to ask any questions in case you want to either anonymously ask or attach your name to it. All fine. So just drop them in the comments or in the chat. To kick off, please let us know if you're here live. Just say hi in the comments. If you're on Telegram, X, LinkedIn, or YouTube, drop hi in the comments so that we know that this is working, and we'll kick off. So let me introduce our guest. To my left here, I don't know how you can see it, but to my left here, I've got Georgia, who is the Director of Key Accounts at Blueprint. I've got Daniel Beard here, who's a partner at Partis Capital, Mark Smith, who is Managing Director Africa for Every Matrix, and then Simon Pilkington, Managing Director for Best Betting Media. Welcome to this panel, guys. What I wanted to start off with for each of you is just if you could give us a little story about kind of how and when imposter syndrome hit you the hardest. Can I start with you, Georgia? Is that okay?
Yeah, sure, no problem. I was thinking about this actually. I think it's probably been with me through my entire time at Blueprint, but it probably hit me the hardest when I started to manage a small team, realizing that you have people looking at you for direction and decisions that you make can contribute to their career. And I guess that's when I started to question whether I should be in that position, making those decisions, guiding them, like who was I to tell them the next step or make a decision on whether they got promoted. That's probably when I felt it the most, because I think you are then responsible for somebody else, not only yourself. So yeah, I think that's probably when it hit me the hardest.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I remember that you said on our podcast that you said imposter syndrome is almost like a person sitting next to me. It's always been there and it's always going to be there. And it's always like, I'm always treating it like a friend now. Talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think you do get used to it. And I think you hopefully learn to use it as a bit of a tool. And I think the more you talk about it and talk to people, you realize that a lot of people experience it. And I'd like to think it's quite normal as you progress in a career, especially if you're a bit more aware of yourself and I guess care what people think or care about your team or care about your colleagues. I think it comes naturally then to question yourself regularly. So yeah, I think you do get used to it being there and hopefully try to channel it better.
Yeah, love that. Thank you for sharing that. How was it for you, Simon? Where has it hit you the hardest? I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your journey as well and how that's affected you.
Yeah, I think probably even as a further extension to Georgia, I feel like now that I can look back, knowing what it is, I've probably had it a lot of my life, to be honest. But obviously, going through school and sort of a younger age, you don't really get taught about anything like that or know what it is. The hardest it has been for me was when I took over the CEO role at Cafe Rocks. I'd been in the company for a couple of years before that. I sort of got to a point where I sort of felt myself worthy going into it and sort of half expected for something like that to come to fruition. But I took over from a founder and the sole CEO to that point. And the first few months were fantastic. I think I sort of, with the adrenaline and the buzz behind what I was doing, no real doubts crept in. But as the sort of dust settles, I think COVID kicked in at the same time, which wasn't ideal timing. But as the dust settled, the impact of your job starts to really ring true to you, and you realize the decisions that you're going to be making sitting at the top of the tree with not as much of a support system around, what those impacts are going to be on the wider business and on people. And so it became sort of a slow slope into quite a fast slope of a few small little doubts. Oh, this is something I've not done before. How do I go about this? To very fast becoming almost pretending I was someone else. Thinking I had to be Tim, the previous CEO, thinking I needed to be like him because he'd set such great foundations in the company. And all of a sudden, I wasn't taking decisive actions for myself. I was very much trying to predict what someone else would have done, and I was probably becoming a blocker very quickly to the business of either moving it forwards or shutting down initiatives that I probably should have shut down. And that sort of 3 month to sort of 7-8 month period was really tough, and it just snowballed and snowballed to the point it would start to affect me outside of work, the stress that was building up around it. I'd take that home with me, or I'd finish work later. I wasn't as present around friends, family, etc. And that just became all encompassing. And it was through, thankfully, having amazing owners in Tim, Fedger and Kai, that I could be very open with them, and we'd have frank discussions constantly. And we worked out that both Tim and I probably needed to bring in a coach as well. Tim to give up a bit more control of the baby that he'd born, so to speak. And for myself to be able to take on more of that responsibility and remove some of, or at least utilize the imposter syndrome in a different way. But yeah, it was extremely tough during that initial period.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's also, you just brought up a really interesting point, which is somebody said to me a while back that the higher you go, the thinner the air gets. I think that's so true, right? As you move up in the business and, you take over that CEO role, fortunately you had some people to talk to, but there's very few that you can talk to. And then nobody puts that mirror in front of you either, right? Which makes it really hard.
Yeah, and I think circumstance with Kathy in particular, we didn't have a particularly wide C-level or robust C-level. That's something that I brought in over time and widened that out, which actually really helped because it gave me people to really bounce stuff off and make sure that, give myself a bit of a sense check, but without fully going down the rabbit hole of deeply doubting and deeply questioning. But yeah, once you get to sort of, as you move up for a business, you've got mentors, you've got bosses, you've got peers, you've got employees, you've got people to sort of sense check yourself for you, and people will raise concerns or issues about things. So you're not constantly doubting yourself. But when you get to that sort of pinnacle position, there's not as much around you to really do that, and especially when you don't really know what you're dealing with at the same time.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Okay, how was it for you, Mark? So when did imposter syndrome hit you the hardest? I'd love for you to kind of share your story, please.
Yeah, look, a lot of what Georgia and Simon have said rings very true for from my experience too. It's been around just thinking about it and the work that I've done with coaches and therapists, etc. over the last few years. Is that for sure it's been around. It's not just in career, but it's from school too. Just constantly that self-doubt that creeps up, and not thinking that I've got whatever's been awarded to me, or promotion or whatever it may be, down to who I am and what I'm able to achieve, but more to being lucky, or being in the right place, right time, etc. Anything like that. The point that it really kind of hit home for me was a previous boss I had, a very senior exec. I thought that I could kind of cover it up really well. I would kind of put on this armor going into a big meeting. I could become this person that I thought I needed to be. I do everything on, get the meeting done, and then kind of go back to the mark that I know. And as I said, I thought I could really cover that up, and no one saw it. And the senior exec kind of pulled me aside and he said, "Why do you doubt yourself? You present really well. You almost over prepared to a point, but I can see that doubts, creeps in at times, and it's very clear to me, just back yourself 100%. And, I was a bit taken aback initially with it. I didn't really do anything with that advice at the time, but it's something that stuck with me, continuously. There's obviously been multiple occasions over the years where, I haven't spoken up when I feel that I should have. And I know that what I would say would be of value and could have changed the situation. But it's in a position now where I've kind of learned how to harness these things, know very well, what's good it can actually bring. But it also, in a lot of ways, it can, I feel it helps me stay grounded and humble, and then just kind of working around different triggers that I have to kind of notice them when they're popping up. But for sure, if I look through my career, I've moved up at every company quite significantly, very quickly. But there's always been that point like, am I the guy? Am I the right person to do this? But looking back at it and kind of just taking a moment to kind of assess what's been done and just slow things down, I can see like, okay, cool. I'm here and I'm in this position because I'm actually performing in a way that's wanted by the company or whoever that may be.
Yeah, I love it, Mark. Such a good example as well of it's something that stays with you, right? And I saw a question from Timothy now about self-sabotage and how to break that cycle. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about that in a second, Timothy. So thank you for sharing that, Mark. Daniel, how was it for you, mate? Like, talk a little bit through how self-sabotage how imposter syndrome showed up for you and how it affected you through your career. And what some of the consequences were.
Sure. I think it was most prominent joining Partist as a partner. When I think I mentioned to you before, I had it internally and externally. So internally within the partner meetings, my colleagues have very strong educational backgrounds, Oxbridge, Duke University, MBAs from top business schools. I don't have that background. So I felt a little lost when I was within these partner meetings whilst launching a new division. I think externally, again, our counterparts are private equity, C-suite, investment banks, and so on. So you just felt a little out of place and sort of guessing whether you should be there and why you're there at the same time.
Sorry, should have taken it off mute. Thank you very much for sharing that, Daniel. Yeah, I think it's so true, right? We compare us. I think one of the big things, guys, I'd love to talk with all of you about is that we often compare ourselves to everybody else's highlight reel, right? We see, like when it's like networking, we see everybody else almost kind of posturing, I suppose, right? Pretend like showing up as their best selves, and we compare ourselves to that, and then we feel inadequate, I suppose. One of the things I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about, any of you really, is kind of that self-talk that's maybe from you, Daniel. We spoke about it really well on the podcast, like that self-talk that you wake up with where you put yourself on the back foot before you even start the day. I think it's something that many people will recognize, and a key reason why imposter syndrome shows up for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think also strangely, the people externally looking at you don't think or feel the same as you do. Their rationale is you're there for a reason. But I think you're right. I think there are internal mechanisms where people almost bully themselves subconsciously in a work capacity without looking internally and managing the narrative as to why they're there. I think with imposter syndrome, I actually wish most people had it within business now, rather than it is a strength rather than a weakness, because it really does allow you to be more detailed, more empathetic. You're a good listener. You'll double check facts because you don't want to be wrong in the meeting. You listen to your team. You're more humble. So I think we're on the rather self-sabotage. You've got to change the narrative on it. It is a strength to have imposter syndrome. It's not a negative. It allows you to be better. And I think most people just need to understand that they're more deserving and capable than they think.
Yeah, love that. And a lot of that comes down to that self-talk. And I completely agree. It's when it actually flows over into self-sabotage. So maybe, Mark, can you talk a little bit about that? You shared some really personal things on the podcast episode that we did, and like what were some of the consequences for you of experiencing that imposter syndrome?
Sure, I think a lot of it's like, when I agree completely with what Daniel said. It's not a negative, and there's so many good things that you can take from it. And where I did think it was a negative a long time ago, my whole mind frame has changed around that. But for me, when it's at its absolute worst, and this is the negative part, is that when I'm in a really poor mental state, when I'm not doing the work that I know I need to put in, I'm not looking after myself, I'm just kind of, looking back in the past, that self-sabotage comes in big time. So the smallest things become the biggest things. I kind of, in those bad moments, it's the kind of burn it all down mentality and Whereas, you know, I could be over to the point where I mentioned earlier, over prepared. You know, I'll double check, triple check everything that's going on. I would just give you know, I'll be in this mindset of like, I'm not really, why am I here? You know, I shouldn't be here. I'm not worthy to be here. And I wouldn't do the necessary work that's required. And, you know, that's when I would run into trouble pretty much every single time. But look, for me, the self-sabotage is something that still comes into play almost on a daily basis. You know, as I mentioned early on, there's little triggers and tools that I have that I'm able to kind of catch them now earlier before they manifest into something that is completely unmanageable. So for me, it's a lot of management continuously and just kind of being self-aware a lot of the time in terms of what's going on, and then also being incredibly, almost brutally honest with myself too, to pick them up when it's going on.
Yep, makes a lot of sense. Hey, and Simon, when you so you got into that CEO position at Cafe Rocks, all of a sudden a huge additional responsibility. I remember when we were talking about it that you said, right, now there's all these decisions that will affect tons of people as well, right? And it has all these this knock-on effect. You started working with, I remember you called him a funny German coach with a funny accent.
I hope he's not watching.
I hope so too. Well, anyway, still, it might be funny. But what were some of the things that have helped you the most through that journey? What are some of the tools and tactics, or even, you know, changes in mindset that help you the most in that journey and working together with that coach?
Yeah, I think having, I was really lucky, and in answer to sort of Timothy's question, how do you break that cycle to an extent, there's going to be different ways for different people. And I was very fortunate that I got to work with a coach who wasn't just a business coach, but had a high psychologically sort of strong educational background as well. So he fully understood imposter syndrome and could very quickly identify with me what I was feeling and what I was suffering. And it was the first person I spoke to where I was just like, yeah, that's exactly how I'm feeling. This is exactly how bad it is. And we did a few different things, just like from purely talking through actions, talking through a few ways that you could sort of start to handle it a little bit better and reframe it. So just being able to talk, recognizing the signals earlier. So when those smaller doubts came in, like I said at the start of the slower slope, before it gets to the steep slope and you're right down out the other side and start self-sabotaging, you're sort of seeing the signals a little bit earlier. You can say, well, look, you're doubting this, you're doubting that. Now, actually though, you're very much relevant to this part. You should be here. You should be in this process. You've done this, you've done that. You know why you're here, and you can start shutting that down, and you start to be able to reframe it. And at the same time, we actually went further. We did a few things called tapping, which is a sort of different process, which around some of the limps and stuff like that. It was really interesting. I didn't quite necessarily know what I was getting into that, but it was really interesting. But he also helped frame it a lot by giving me many examples of people that he'd worked with, anonymously, of course, that had also suffered. And I think as soon as you realize that this isn't just something that you're dealing with, and it's something that many people are dealing with, you sort of realize that you're not actually special here. This isn't something that's an illness or anything. It's something that you can actually handle and deal with. And you, like Dan says, you can use it, you can flip the switch a bit and use it as a strength. But in that first instance, the costs are real, but at the same time, those costs can actually become sort of rewards down the line if you use it properly.
Yeah, love that. Thank you for sharing, Sam. Really great advice. And Georgia, you took over. You stepped into this big role where someone had been doing a great job, and I remember you talking about all the connections that she had and all of the I don't know, the level that you felt you had to step into. What were some of the things that you learned through that journey? And if you would go back now, what will you say to yourself coming back into that role and taking over from Joe and kind of going, being a bit kinder to yourself, I suppose?
I probably wouldn't change anything I did. I think how I was shaped, how I've become now. So I guess, like we said before, you can use it as a tool. I think I'd have reassured myself that there's not one way to do a role. And so a bit like the guys were saying, if you take over from somebody, you try and replicate what they did, and you think, oh, I would have maybe said to myself, Joe wouldn't have done it that way. Oh no, is that going to be seen, differently? I think that, but then I think I would have told myself that's okay. There is no hard and fast rule in any role. I guess really you can shape it how you are. Like my lifestyle's slightly different to Joe's, so I've had to adapt how I would approach certain situations, and I punish myself thinking, is that going to affect the business? Is that going to change people's perception of Blueprint if it's always been done one way? I still definitely feel that all the time. I think that's just natural, really. And I think surrounding yourself with the right team as well, like if you're lucky enough to work with good people, going back to the self-sabotage, I tried to talk Joe and Matt out of giving me the role that I'm in now. I gave them like why I couldn't do it, and not one why I could, which in hindsight is just madness. But I'm lucky that they saw through that. And I think if you're lucky enough that you work with good people, they will see the potential in you even when you don't see it yourself. So I guess like also if you suffer from imposter syndrome, you can try and be that person for somebody else too. So if you're managing a team, like you be that person for them, where if they're talking themselves out of something or telling you that they can't do it, you can try and encourage them that they can. It's like a knock-on effect. I think that's truly helped me, is just people around me giving me confidence, my colleagues, previous managers, even like my own team. You know, I'd say that's a big part of it.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. I'm gonna reframe it a little bit, if that's okay. I think we shouldn't call it imposter syndrome. You know, it's and I think we shouldn't say suffer with it. We live with it. And somebody else, I had Maria Hammond on the podcast a while back, and she stole it from someone else. She said, I can't remember who it was, but she called it imposter moments. And I think that's a really great way of phrasing it, isn't it? Because yes, it's kind of always there, but it's usually kind of the big meetings or something, right? Or it's specific times where it shows up and where you really start doubting yourself. I don't know. Do you agree with that? Do you agree with kind of living with it and calling it imposter moments? How do you guys?
Yeah, I think look, it's definitely imposter. But for me, it's subjective, of course. But for me, it's imposter moments. I think the difference between, I guess, doubting yourself and imposter syndrome is, do you understand, or have you put the work in? Is the preparation there? I think Simon said relevance as well. You have to be, if you've been promoted into a position and that's how you feel, try to understand why you've been promoted, and your ability to learn within that role. But I think, look, Simon nailed it. For me, it was relevance.
Yeah. What about the rest of you? How do you feel about that? Living with it.
I think the word syndrome just makes it sound so permanent, right? So when you first learn about it, you know, it's almost feeds into the cycle of imposter syndrome, because you're like, oh my God, this is something I'm suffering with, and it's a syndrome and it's permanent, and I'm not going to be able to break this, and that's not healthy. And then the deeper you get into it, it keeps feeding the cycle of, oh, you're less worthy, because now it's impacted your family, and now you're failing them, and now you're less worthy. And once you finally break it, and the self-sabotage thing is hugely relevant to me, because through that role, I piled on 25 kilos, was mentally shot, was unfit and not present for anybody around me. And like, to be honest, I don't know how, there wasn't a way I got around that. There was just looking in the mirror one day and realizing I really did not like what I saw. And that, I think I said on the podcast, I literally next day, clean slate, started working on myself and stopped deprioritizing myself within the process. But yeah, I think now, and I started boxing after that as well, which really, let Dan hit me in the face a few times, which was helpful. I don't remember much anymore, but yeah, I think it. Once then alongside the sort of coaching that I had with it, and that mentorship, which was, again, I was fortunate to have, and you start bringing in all the foundational pieces again of actually, I am relevant. I am worthy of where I've got to. I know I can do these parts of my job. I know I've got people around me that can help with X, Y, and Z. Oh, and I'm back present with my family again. I'm not a complete failure. I'm not completely at my depth here. And all of a sudden you can start realizing that this is something I can work with. And it's really taught me, alongside some of the things Dan said earlier around sort of why it can be a strength, it's also taught me massively that, you should enjoy the hard things and really really dive into the hard things, whether that's life, whether that's challenges, whether that's work related. If a lot of the time that's when it would manifest the most, when something new came up and it was a hard task and it's something I'm not used to. It'd be something I'd kick the can down the line and not think about it because I didn't think I was good enough to do it. So, but now it's like, no, let's get that hard thing done. I don't want to go quite as extreme as eat the frog type thing, but when there are hard things, they're really good for you, no matter what the outcome is necessarily. When you've really involved yourself in something hard and you come out the other side of it, the sort of fulfillment you feel out of it is so refreshing. And if you can use that sort of imposter moment to sort of drive that, then all the better.
I think Leo, you have to find the source for what's creating that feeling. On the podcast, I said for me, it was because I was adopted as a child. I had low self-esteem. I was a little chubby as a kid as well, which didn't help, which fed into the same feeling. And I think through mentorship and coaches that I've worked with, it's about getting to the source. For me, it was about loving my inner child and going back and talking to that teenage boy about how great he was and how loved he was and how he's meant to be in this world and has great friends and great parents and so on. But I think for anyone, it's not something that can just be covered up. You have to get to the source.
Yep, I love that. Great advice. There's this question from Timothy. What if it's not just imposter syndrome? How can you tell if you're genuinely out of your depth or doubting yourself? I'd love to ask you, Mark, to answer that. But before you do, I'd love to say something about it first, which is it's important to go outside of your comfort zone, right? And I think when you feel like an imposter, very often it just means that you're outside of your comfort zone. Inside of your comfort zone, all of your dreams go to die. It's just that you don't want to go too far outside of your comfort zone. But when you're outside of that comfort zone, what happens is it feels uncomfortable, right? And you might feel that you're slightly out of your depth. So very normal. But Mark, how would you answer this? How can you tell that you're generally out of your depth or that you're just doubting yourself?
Well, I think like if I bring it straight back to iGaming, we are, it is a results-driven industry. The industry is growing, exponentially. If you're not performing at, in a leadership position, managerial position, whatever it may be, you are going to get found out eventually. So whether you're not good enough, it'll come out in the wash sooner rather than later. But just kind of that self-evaluation always is always good. Like what I said, the being brutally honest, and just seeing where you are is, and what you're doing. If you're achieving, consistently well, and you're keeping track of what you're doing and you keep those negative thoughts out, obviously your growth just keeps getting, it keeps getting bigger and bigger as you go along. But if you are on the point where you're constantly doubting every single thing that you're doing, you are not going to get anywhere. And there are going to be people that are more aspirational than you, whatever which way they might be, that are going to be able to, overtake you in some way or the other. And that's fine for some people, for sure. But, it's all about performing in one way or the other in this industry. And we're growing at such a rate now across every kind of vertical that if you're not good enough, you will be found out very quickly.
I think if you've got the foresight to ask the question, am I genuinely out of my depth or am I just doubting myself? You've got a great platform already, because you should be able to, hopefully you've got people, either founders, bosses, whoever, whatever level it may be above you or around you, to actually speak to them very openly and frankly. And if the conversation turns to, why do you think you're doubting yourself? And imposter syndrome does a great job at just blurring facts, right? You're good enough to do this, but it's telling you, something is telling you you're not. Whereas being genuinely out of your depth is possibly like, I really don't know how to do this. I really don't know what I'm doing. I'm not going to be able to do this. And I think having, if you can ask that question, you can have that conversation, and then you can start working on whichever one of those it is. And yeah, I think otherwise it's a very hard thing to sort of differentiate between.
Yep, love that. Thank you, Lee, for your comments. Always good to see you here. Georgia, I'd love to hear from you. Can you describe a moment where perhaps you felt going into a specific situation, you felt like an imposter, you thought, oh my God, I am going to be found out, I'm not going to be able to do this. And then afterwards, it was all fine.
Yeah.
Like, has that ever happened? It's a bit of a leading question.
Yeah, it's definitely happened multiple times for me. But I think most recently, a bigger one was I got invited to do a talk to Flutter. Actually, they had an internal celebration and they had all the UKI brands and the MDs, and they asked if, being a big partner of theirs, we could come and talk about the history between Blueprint and Flutter and talk through our successes together. And they asked me to do it, and I was very nervous before I had to do that, and I really, if I'm honest, didn't want to do it, and I would have paid a lot of money for somebody to have taken my spot. And I had to do it in front of Joe and then Nick, my current boss, our CCO, which made it even, I don't know about anybody else, but sometimes when you're presenting in front of your own colleagues, that's almost as difficult as doing it in front of, other people.
Yeah.
And yeah, I definitely felt the pressure, felt the nerves, felt like it shouldn't be me talking through this. But then I did it, and then afterwards I felt amazing, and it definitely helped build my confidence in those situations, helped build my presenting skills, and I think it made it so that next time I have to do anything like that, I've done a few different presentations since. Each one gets easier and easier. So yeah, that was definitely a moment where I think I just thought this shouldn't be me stood up here. But yeah, there was really no reason why it should be anyone. It was. I think I learned that we're all working as a team, and it's okay for anyone to stand up and talk about a partnership, or when we've all contributed to that in our own way. So
yeah, love that. I think it's such a great realization, isn't it, that the stories we tell ourselves are always so much harsher than the actual reality of it, right? We worry about all these things, and then the moment actually happens and it's all going to be fine. And even if it wouldn't be fine, it's still going to be okay, isn't it? I think we're often, we put so much weight on all of it. And I believe that what you were just saying, Georgia, I think just realizing that and going through it, those moments that you might have had regularly where you felt like an imposter, and then building the evidence for yourself, writing it down, that it actually was fine, almost builds a bank of confidence for yourself as well.
And the reality is, I don't think anybody minds as much as you either. I think you always overthink things yourself, and everyone else would arrive to see a presentation and just be looking for the positives, or be thinking somebody's really brave to stand up and do that. They wouldn't be looking for the negatives. But I think you within yourself, when you do something, you always look for, well, I do anyway, probably look back and think I could have improved on that, should have said this. But in reality, nobody else is probably thinking that same way. So trying to change your view on that helps.
Yeah, Leo, just also on that, I think it's, again, why it's such a good strength is that, for all of us on this panel, I think it's quite clear to say that, we would all be overly prepared for whatever we're going into, because we really care about, almost performing at a high level. So, what George is saying, going into whether it's a big presentation, a small presentation, there's always that fear, in varying levels of whether, dread, thinking like, oh, is this going to be, am I good enough to do this? And nearly every single time you come out of it, and it's like that was, a breeze, because, you've used this imposter moment or imposter syndrome, whatever you want to call it, to your strength, because you prepared and you've actually come through it, and, better than what others would be able to. So I think it's a great part in terms of using it, to keep you grounded is one. You always prepared, and then from a leadership perspective too, the humility that comes with it, being prepared to take back feedback, etc. It's a key cornerstone of this whole topic that we're on today. So look, the more we speak about it, it's clear that it's not a bad thing. Used well, it's to your benefit. And what Dan said earlier on about wishes more people had it in business, it would make life a hell of a lot easier for everyone. But that's my 2 cents on what George had to say.
Yeah, love it.
I think if you keep facing it, then once you get through it, as Mark says, it gives you immovable confidence. So when you do go to that meeting or that pitch, or you're talking publicly, it gives you such a solid foundation to build on. Sorry, Simon, I jumped ahead of you.
It's fine. I think the last comments that Georgia made at the end is, she would come out and say, what could I have done better? Really critically look at her speech. To some, that may be the feeling of imposter syndrome, but for me, that's just one of an amazing trait that anybody who's looking to progress in their career or a leader should have, is someone who's willing to be, at the end of the day, for anybody ambitious, I guess life is about learning, is about being a little bit better each day, and is about being able to adapt better each day. And in terms of turning this from a weakness to a strength, this is exactly it. And those comments at the end are exactly who I would hire, because they are willing. Yes, they've been nervous, they've had doubts, but they're still willing to look at the end of it, even when it's gone well, probably, that to actually look at themselves and say, well, how could I improve it? How could I be that little bit better? So for me, that's just an incredible trait within someone to move them forwards. So already you can start reframing it as a strength.
Yeah, love that. One of the things that all of you've kind of said in some shape, way, or form is how authenticity is so important, right? And how, like, almost trying to be someone else when you feel that you're out of your depth, or you don't know what you feel that you don't know what you're talking about, is actually the opposite of what you should be doing. So what would you say to someone that maybe feels like, I'll give you a very specific example. I remember when I was first promoted to director, I was director of retention, I was doing CRM, and I didn't exactly know how NGR was calculated, right? I didn't know if bonuses were taken off from wagering or on losses, and it's just a simple admin thing. But I thought, as director of retention, surely you must know this thing, right? And so I was sat in a revenue meeting. I felt like an absolute imposter. I was going red. I thought, they're going to find out. I've just been promoted, youngest director there. Surely I'm going to be sacked. And I started making stuff up, right? Which made it even worse. So what would you advise to somebody that maybe feels fearful of being found out? And we all know that authenticity is where is that. What would you advise them?
I'm happy to answer this one. I just because the best advice I ever got given when I started my role, or even before, was always say when you don't know the answer. Never ever pretend, or always just say I'm not sure, but I'll find out. And I think one thing in leadership or any role important to remember is that you don't always have to have the answers, and that's why you've got a team or you've got your colleagues. And there should be no shame in ever saying at any level, I don't understand that. Could you explain it? Or I don't know that. Could you tell me? Because I think that gives other people the confidence to do the same, and then you all learn together. Whereas I think especially when you're more senior, you should be doing that more often, as much as you can, to show people within your team or your peers that it's okay to not know. I don't know about anybody else, but that's when you find it most refreshing. Our boss, our MD, will often say, he likes people to ask a question. Never, there's no stupid question, and he'll often say, I don't know that, can somebody else answer that? Even at the top of your game, even at the most senior part of a role, you should never, very rarely will everybody know everything. That's the whole reason how business works. You all have your own section that you're responsible for. So yeah, I would say never ever be afraid to ask a question. And I think anyone who finds that silly or should, that's probably them in the wrong, as opposed to you questioning it. Is probably my advice.
Love it. Anybody else?
Go on, Dan.
Actually answered it eloquently. It's for me, it's knowing your lane and being comfortable in that. For me trying to talk about corporate finance is not my area of expertise. Me talking about what my role in this process is exactly what I'm there to do. And so many times I've said, I just don't know the answer to that, and being very comfortable with that. It's a great answer.
Yeah, love it. Okay, we've got one last question, and then we'll kind of close off. Daniel is asking, great interview series, mental health, which is something that he's focused on currently, Daniel. Mental health is so critical to professional performance. How can we normalize it in our industry and provide better access to support tools? Mark, what do you think?
It's, we're at the best place now than we have been ever before. You know, the mental health aspect, not just in iGaming, but around the world, it's not a taboo subject anymore. It's something that's openly spoken about. People can ask for help. I think ultimately it comes down to the individual in terms of what they want to do. You know, big corporates, businesses can. It's quite commonplace now for there to be, support mechanisms put in place, whether it's, areas within the office where you can go and have a, 15, 20-minute timeout and just kind of, unwind and relax. And then there's obviously people you can speak to and support tools online, etc. But I think the work that you do, Leo, you're at the forefront of that, really pushing, people that are, part and parcel of this industry from all aspects of iGaming, bringing their stories online, and people to realize that, I'm not the only one going through this. This is pretty normal in one way or the other, to be feeling this way. From my side, I had this for years and years. I've been in iGaming now for 17 or 18 years. A lot of people have no idea that I've been facing these struggles that I've had in the past. But speaking about it now, it's almost to a point where there's so many people that have come out. You've introduced me to quite a few guys that are looking for some support, and just chatting to everyone. Everybody's issues are different, but like that kind of community aspect that you really do well in fostering and bringing people up and letting people speak their stories and being open to asking for help. It's that in itself has done wonders for many people. So I think, look, it's only going to get better from here, and it's really great to see where we are at the moment.
Love it. Dan, would you mind, how do you feel about this, the whole normalization? I know that sometimes, you come from a rugby background. That is an environment where this kind of, you could just got a man up type of environment. What would you say to that? How can we normalize this? And what are some of the things that you feel would help in our industry to provide better access to mental health support?
Yeah, I think the man up sort of status has gone, right? No one's expecting that.
Yeah.
I think nobody wants someone to continually moan about the same problem and not have the foresight to go and try and fix it. But I think, look, there's lots of tools out there. I think your colleagues, being able to talk to your colleagues. Partis doesn't have a huge HR function, so I don't know what's accessible for the big corporates these days. But I think, look, yeah, the being held accountable and allowing your colleagues and be able to talk to them is for me, the leader.
I think part of what leads into that is emotional intelligence as well.
From the CEO level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think emotional intelligence plays a huge part in this. And I think when you're hiring leaders, when you're bringing leaders through the business, identifying that as a trait so that, people know, having a high level of emotional intelligence in the business allows you to be more empathetic, allows you to actually see issues within the business. It allows you to hire diversely. It allows you to hire from wide pools of people, and it allows you to create this collaboration of people from different backgrounds that can add different things to your business, which is exceptional. But then having that emotional intelligence to actually understand that every person, either culturally, physically, mentally, is different, and to know that we need to meet different needs, it's a huge part of it. So having highly emotionally intelligent leaders is a big part of it. And I also like that Leah's stitched up Dan with the next question.
Yeah, which put me off.
No, we're not going to ask it. We're not going to ask it. We're not going to pull it up. No. Okay, so thank you very much, everybody. Great session. I just let's do some parting words. So I'd love to hear what's one tip or piece of advice that you would have given yourself when you first started experiencing imposter syndrome, when you were younger in iGaming than you are today. Can we start with you, Mark? Is that okay?
Sure. I think the one tip is just to slow down. And I've mentioned a couple of times now, what works for me is that just to slow down, take some time away, you know, whether it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever time frame works for you. Write down, you know, what you've done, all the negative thoughts that you're having, you know, about, if you want to use it, imposter syndrome, and then write a counter to that in terms of, you know, what you actually are able to do. And it just reframes the mindset for me. I think that if I'd done that in the past, a lot of kind of these, you know, negative moments and self-sabotage, etc., would have been nipped in the bud pretty quickly. But for me, it's just kind of moving away from the screen, you know, simplifying things and then moving on from there.
What about you, Georgia?
Yeah, I would agree with Mark. Take some time out and just talk yourself through the reasons why you've been given the position you've got, and also not striving for perfection, and that knowing that as long as you're, like I think Mark said a few times, as long as you're going into everything as prepared as you can be, and you're trying your best, and you're listening to your team and your colleagues, and you know, you're giving it all you can give, that's really all anyone can ask of you. And sometimes it's not your decision, you know, whether you do progress or whether you stay in the role. But I think just having confidence that you've given it everything you can, and reminding yourself of that, and that there will always be somebody that can perhaps do it a little different to you or a little better than you, or and that's okay. You know, we're not all trying to be perfect at all times, so give yourself a little bit of grace in that way, I guess.
Yeah, love it. What about you, Dan?
Yeah, just with imposter syndrome, it's just a sign that you care deeply about your work and you want to do your best, and rather than let it hold you back, just see it as a sign of commitment to grow and learn.
Yeah, love it. Simon, final words?
Yeah, I mean, those three have said it pretty well. I mean, slow down, try to find your own system for dealing with it. And I think, you know, if I could have said anything to myself before, it would have been to try and understand it earlier, because once you understand the problem, you can deal with it much easier. And I think Mark's system is perfect in that regard once you understand what you're dealing with. So yeah.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for sharing your truths and your stories. Really appreciate it. If anybody needs any support with this or feels that they're struggling, please reach out to any of us. We've all gone through this, and really what we're all hoping to achieve here with this session is to help normalize this feeling of feeling a little bit out of your depth, feeling like an imposter, and you know, sometimes that might result into some self-sabotage that most of us have gone through here as well. The key is to use it as your strength. And if you want to find out how to best do that, please, you know, drop us a message, connect with us, any of us on LinkedIn. I'm sure we're all happy. I'm definitely happy to help. I'm sure the other four here are as well. So thank you very much for your time. And if you can, please leave in the comments your one big takeaway from this session. We'd all love to hear what you thought and what you're going to do with it. So thank you very much. Hope to see you in the next one. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right.